Good morning, friends. I hope we are all well, and I'm super excited to be here. It is the third day of the MASIHAMBISANE Dialogues, which started on the 21st of May on Wednesday, and today is the last day, and this is the final session. My name is Thobile Maphanga. I am part of the steering committee and Jomba contemporary dance experience team. I am tuning in from the lovely Basel, Switzerland, and I'm very excited to introduce the panel that I will be chairing this morning, final panel of the dialogues. Wesley, if you are so kind to please bring in my guests, Orwa, Nyrabia, Hadi, Kateryna, and Dr. Princess. It would be wonderful to see you all. Thank you very much, Wesley. This panel, which I have curated, unpacks the choreographies that engage the politics of movement of cultural workers and outputs such as dance across territorial borders. What can dance artists, festival makers in our current times learn and share about navigating the limited and limiting options we have to move with freedom and grace? What strategies can we learn from the past and other fields that might aid us in the navigation of the current madness of borders curving in, on, and against us as we attempt to share global stories and ways of being? What does it mean to be a worldly artist, festival maker, cultural worker in the current day, and is it worth it? Um, I think this is a very timely subject. Having had my own president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, engaged with the crazy orange man on on that big continent. What does it mean for my dear friend and the president of the Festival Academy's board to finally be able to go home, Damascus? What does it mean for Kateryna to be able to live in Switzerland and be in Ukraine at the moment? What does it mean for Hadi to be in Jordan and be trying to work when all cultural funding is breaking down and we don't know what is gonna happen? And what does it mean for my dear friend, Princess, who comes from an incredible country like Zimbabwe but has to work in South Africa? So at this segue, I'm going to ask my dear friends who have all joined me today, and I'm so grateful that you can all be online, to briefly just introduce themselves. I'm not going to do any bio reading. I think everybody has read or seen the brochure. If you have not, we spent a lot of time and money creating it, so please read it. But I'm going to ask my friends to be in a more fun way to tell me about these intersections of who they are, how is it that you are where you are? How is it that you do the job that you do? How is it that you think what you are doing is so important? So I'm going to start with Hadi because you're the first person on my screen. And from there, you decide who goes next.
Thank you so much, Toby, and I'm so happy to be here with all these friends and colleagues. Can you hear me well? So my name is Hadi, and I'll start with an introduction. Every time I introduce myself differently, I found out really recently about this. So I will start that I am a conflict of interest. I'm a choreographer who studied business and anthropology, has nothing to do with art. And I found myself working on festival directions curation and having the excitement and love to do artistic residencies. With that, in a country like Jordan with a very small team, I also found myself doing fundraising, doing outreach, connections, building partnerships and strategies. So I always feel myself like navigating in an ecosystem from where a project starts and how does it end and what is the process about it, where in the presentation level or in a programming level. Thank you. And now, Princess.
Hey, Hadi, I kind of knew you were coming for me. Um, hello, everybody. It's such an honor to be here. My name is Princess, and I come from Zimbabwe, but I work and live in South Africa. Um, I think the best way to introduce myself here is to say that I've been crossing boundaries since I left my mother's womb. I left my mother's womb in a dramatic fashion, and I guess that kind of informs why I'm a disruptor and why I'm constantly challenging boundaries and disrupting. And that's part of my personal and, of course, political conviction, which comes or stems from how I entered the world. Yeah, and I think I also want to introduce myself by saying that there's something that I think a lot of people don't know about me, which is that I had hoped that I would be a truck driver and a 100-meter sprinter when I was growing up. That's quite interesting, right? But I think that those aspirations still sit in the body, even though I'm not necessarily practicing that. So yeah, that's one thing I think the world should know about me. I should be sprinting with the Usain Bolt. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Orwa.
Hello, I'm Orwa Nyrabia. I'm a filmmaker, film producer, and festival director. For the past 7 years and a half, I've been the artistic director of the International Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam, IDFA. Before that, I co-founded a festival in my home country, Syria, in 2008, together with my partner, Diana El Giroudi, and a wonderful team of people. We had to stop the festival after 4 editions in protest against the violation of human rights in the country back then in 2011, 2012. Crossing borders is something I could write a whole biography on when I'm 80. I hope I live until then and write a memoir on the borders point, because I've been living as an exile for the past 14 years. Then I became a citizen of Europe, legally speaking, a few years back now, and this means that I still was an exile, but I was also local in another way. And then the dictatorship in Syria collapsed on the morning of December 8, 2024. And that was one morning when I woke up to the news at 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., and discovered suddenly that I'm not an exile anymore, that it is not anymore by force that I sit wherever I sit. In going back to earlier times, I am the son of a couple of loving, politically engaged engineers who came from 2 very different and often conflicting religious and cultural identities in Syria. And this made me grow up into loving 2 conflicting sides and hating each one of them at the same time. And to me, it's this dialectic of love and hate at the same time that creates who I am. It is also the dialectic of wanting both sides to feel happy and then feeling guilty whenever I make them happy, actually, because there must be something wrong when people are happy with you. That's the position of culture and art to me. That's the place where we operate. That's why festivals matter. That's why artwork matters, is not to make people happy. Make them many things that are positive. So it's not to annoy people necessarily, but to me, it is not a question of making people happy with me.
Thank you, Orwa. That leaves us with Katya.
Thank you, Toby, and I'm honored to be in such a wonderful and special company. My name is Kateryna, and I come from Ukraine. And since 2017, I was working in Switzerland, and I come from the cultural study, from history theory of culture, and I was curator, visual arts curator, and then I became a festival curator a bit unexpectedly for myself. And after 2022, when Russia invaded and started a full-scale war in Ukraine, I couldn't help but start going back and forth between Switzerland and Ukraine and working more and more on the context connecting, to Ukraine. So I'm in an interesting, probably position talking about the borders and transcending borders, because you probably cannot imagine two, at least in the European context, two more different realities than the war-raged Ukraine. And even though in Kiev, where I'm now, it's temporarily peaceful, but just a few nights ago, there was a 8-hour-long air attack, which involved more than 200 drones. And this is a daily reality. And then we have Switzerland, where the Culturescapes festival that I work, and the festival where Thobile is now also for a few months, and we're very happy about it, is a context of the most peace and neutrality. And I remember that neutrality and arts and culture making was also one of the topics I wanted to talk today. So I'm living and working and thinking between those two realities. And I think it brings me into a position to reflect on the notion of borders as something which involves agency. And I hope there should be, quite literally, but also metaphorically, an agency involved when we talk about borders, when we draw borders, and when we decide to transcend them. And it should be the agency, of people who see and define borders. Because when they're broken or violated by force, that changes the worlds that will probably never be as they were before. And of course, talking to all of you, you know perfectly well from a different experience, and sometimes from personal experience, is what I'm talking about. So where do festivals and where do, culture comes in there? Paradoxically enough, when a lot of our colleagues in Western Europe and Switzerland also are talking about cultural institutions and festivals losing audiences, that audiences are elsewhere, they're going, for other kind of fun and entertainment. But here in Ukraine, for example, it's quite the opposite. In the middle of the war, you cannot find, a movie theater or an exhibition opening or a music festival or a book festival, which actually in a few days there will be a huge book festival opening here. They're full of people. So paradoxically enough, I do see with my own eyes how artistic experiences and cultural experiences become vital for people in the circumstances, in the war circumstances, for example, when cultural experiences and festivals included become environments where this reality, which is, torn and distorted, becomes something which is possible, maybe not to fully understand or grasp, but at least to digest, and also digest it with other people in a certain community. So maybe festivals are about building communities and bringing people together in an attempt to make the life and the world, wherever we are, more livable and more graspable.
Thank you, everybody. So I've written down some words which I'm going to bring up just now. Princess, I did not know you wanted to be a truck driver, my friend. I will try and make that happen for you. Okay. So when I was thinking about this and I was wanting to do something for the Jomba MASIHAMBISANE dialogues around borderlands, this has been a very it's a personally very difficult conversation. I'm going to be a little bit honest, and I'm going to get exposing myself, is that I couldn't respond to Jay Patter's opening keynote on Wednesday. I was in tears, and it really, really, really. Katja mentions it, that we draw borders, we talk about borders, and what does it mean for us as people who are working in culture, where, like Orwa was saying, he talks about the conflict of trying to make people happy or trying not to annoy people, but also engage. what does it mean for us as cultural workers to be trying to bring the world to a certain awareness, but also trying to bring art and beauty into the world? How have you guys experienced that in your work? And what has this idea of movement, because we're in a Jomba as a dance festival. So how has the idea of movement affected the way that you are able to work? And I'm not going to pick on anybody. So if it's okay, can I ask you all to just open your mics and whoever wants to speak first? This idea of moving from one place to another, the idea of moving artists from one place to another, the idea of bringing stories, because I think this is often what we're doing, right? Is the realities that we're bringing is often stories that we think are important to us. It's also often, or at least for me, I know it's always about the things that I think that are really important and that the world's maybe not engaging on. What does this idea of movement? Katja, I was speaking to Yurian when I first arrived in Switzerland, and he said to me, what used to take me 2 hours now takes me 30 hours. What does it mean to move?
Yeah, I think as I'm hearing your question, I'll get in there first. When we're talking about movement and borders, we're talking about literal borders. So in my case, moving from Zimbabwe to South Africa. But also we're talking about political borders, economic borders, structural borders. And I think that's the idea of, again, border crossing has always been fascinating to me. And this is how I get to the concept of festivals of the oppressed. I grew up to two festivals in Harare. There was the Young Baddies one and the Harare International Festival of the Arts. I remember that every time I was there as a student of drama at the University of Zimbabwe, it was not so much about how do I find myself on this grand stage. It was so much about questioning who's able to access this grand stage. What borders do they occupy? Who are they? How do you get to access it? And the question now grew into how do I bring this specific space to the people on the fringes so that they don't move from the fringe and come to the center, but that we move the festival to the people. And then I started asking myself, what is a festival? What does it look like? And so then the idea of moving festivals from what would be known as a festival center, in the case Harare Gardens in Harare, Zimbabwe, and taking the concept of festival and festival making to various communities that I was working with as an applied theater practitioner. So for example, taking the concept of a festival to a group of sex workers that I was working with and having various plays and performances, whether it's in a boardroom or at the park, or I've asked for space at the theater in the park, and having those sex workers use the festival structure or use their performances to tell their story. So that for me would become a festival in its own. And so I was always interested in moving this festival to the people, and even the languages, making sure that the languages that they are familiar with and the storytelling forms that they're familiar with find space. So it was never about what kind of performance do I bring to the Haifa, but how do I bring Haifa or Haifa-lit to the people? So that kind of movement as well is what I'm thinking about right now and grows up in border crossing, but also rewilding. That is rethinking and reorienting myself to what a festival could look like and how I could meaningfully engage with that as a theater maker or as a practitioner who likes to work with communities outside what we would know as the conventional space of theater making.
Thanks, Princess. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Hello. I thought you would choose me, Princess. Um, Actually, this is very interesting topic where I came from Jordan, borders. So I will start a little bit before borders that festivals in general is a new topic in Jordan. So yes, film festival exists before any others. A music festival exists but stopped. Um, Image festival not a long time ago. So there is festivals, but if you want to see that like the the longest, like the oldest festival is 30 years and the rest. Yeah. So when I came up with the idea that we wanted to have a festival, we didn't have many options because the festivals in general, there are around the 12 festival until now in Jordan. So it's not really, we don't really have the culture of festival, the culture of producing a festival, and we don't have like the expertise to run a festival. So you can see the same teams are going and running the different festivals. That made me think a little bit that we are locked, talking about borders, we are a little bit locked in ourselves. I wanted, and I still want, and this is something I'm working on so much, is to have more Arabic presence. I'm talking about not only our border countries, but also like North Africa. I'm talking about Gulf countries. And I started to find out that this is something really difficult, really, really difficult. Or if it's not difficult, it's a little bit different. Different. So I said difficult in the sense that in many ways border are closed, especially in the case of Jordan, in many ways. So it was so difficult to have our neighboring countries to come to Jordan or us to go to our neighboring countries. And for the a little bit further Arab countries, funding and mobility for funding is very limited. It's very, very limited. In a Jordanian festival, and I thought this is how it works actually until I started to do networking events and to see different formats. We never had a Jordanian support, like a national support to run a festival. So you can think that we started to think about it in two ways, as an event that it demands a sponsorship. We started to think even of a format as a certain of a business model. What does it need to sustain itself? And later we get introduced about funding, like international funding, but also again, never local funding, even though every year we're starting to do a new attempts. Then it came for, okay, we started to have a little bit of money. We want to run a festival. And we thought in the beginning, because it's a lack of experience, we will start with Arabs and our budget will match. Then we found out it's so difficult. It was much easier to start from other countries such as Europe because they have much more options for mobility fundings and means of support. And to me, that was a little bit of kind of hitting a wall, meaning that what I want, but what I did. So with that, we started to work to try to fix it. So every time we are having a little bit more presence, we started to find our way, our knowledge, our networking, co-creations, co-curating with Arab curators, and to combine festivals in the Arab countries. That was a way of us to think of sustainability and cross borders. But then I started to find out like every year the scenario changed. Because when we're talking about unstable region, that means there is also instability of planning. So every year we are planning something and we started to feel like this is a valuable experience. Let's continue with it. The next year, it looks like we are starting from zero, which is also exciting. It's another kind of experience, but it's absolutely exciting. So soon we're having the festival is on September. Okay, of course, 40% is the knowledge we like implement, like kind of like imitating, duplicating what we did in the past. But the other 40% is the unknown. And that gives me a sense of, yes, there is a growth here, there is some excitement, the methodology is different, the team is different, but also gives like also a sense like why does it never being process oriented. Like we know the procedures, we know where is the money coming from, we know where is the channels of communications, and we are really clear about how people also cross Jordan and go out, because sometimes they come easily, sometimes there is so much restrictions, and so it's a little bit chaotic but fun. Interesting.
Maybe I jump in now. Was listening to you, Princess, and Hadi, and thinking that, when we talk about borders, when we talk about movement, how many things are taken for granted when we talk about movement? For example, until the moment something is limited or something is taken from you, do we really realize what the movement means? Like in the cityscape, for example, before you become, a mother with a baby and you have to push your stroller, through the streets where the mobility is not just present, do you really understand what the movement in the city is? Or until the moment you become, I don't know, disabled person, and you understand that the city is just not there for you, and I don't know, transport is not there for you because your movement is not a part of sort of by default idea of movement. But when we lose a certain capacity to move, or when it becomes more complicated, what do we gain? What do we start seeing when the movement is not just sort of half-conscious step? And for me, it's interesting because there's two parts of my identity and my professional identity. Switzerland and a Swiss festival in a country where for people, for people living and, Swiss people or people living in Switzerland, movement is not an issue. And you can move in and you can move out, you can travel the world, you can see what you want to see. And so many things are taken for granted. And then with the other part, with the Ukrainian part, as Toby said, something which took 2 hours before, you hop on the plane and you land here and it's fine. Okay, 2.5 takes more than 24 hours now because the airspace is closed and you don't have a choice. You don't travel by train or by bus because you want to be more eco-friendly. It's just because you don't have any other choice. You have to sustain this movement, not just as a process, but also as a certain state of being. And what do you get through that? How do we see the restriction of on movement also within the culture field, as curator or as festival makers? And I think this experience and this kind of reflection on movement as a sometimes as a also privilege, as a certain luxury item, it's what motivates us at Culturescapes Festival in Switzerland to try and show and bring and invite artists from those parts of the world where movement is more restricted, where the resources are not really there, and especially when movement to Europe is highly, or to Switzerland in particular, is highly problematic. So we try and pinpoint and focus on the movement as a liberty, as a freedom, and also movement as a restriction on personal choices. It's part of the focus of the festival, to try and bring to the Swiss audience, which is taking so many things for granted, which is taking arts for granted, which is taking resources for granted, and problematize or disrupt also, as Toby was saying, which is quite an interesting story because, the more wealthy your context is, the more conservative it is. Because wealth doesn't like disruption. Wealth likes, peace, quiet, and, kind of certain field where things are predictable and not challenging. What does it mean to bring a challenge into the context where the challenge is not really welcome and also there's not really a demand for it? Maybe that's also something we can talk about today in terms of not just festival making, but in terms of how we as people dealing with arts, how we also deal with our audiences, and what happens when the audience meets or runs into something which is not pleasant, which is not happy, or I was saying, which is not purely entertaining, or rather the opposite, which is problematic, which is painful, which is not easy, which pushes you to think and see something which you would rather in your peaceful life not really pay so much attention because it's somewhere far away. How do we do that? Open question.
Can I, Toby? I thank you. I mean, this was very intriguing, Kateryna and Hadi and Princess. I'm lost with my thoughts between memories of long mornings having to be queuing on European or American embassies in Syria since 6 a.m. for hours and hours, to be offended by arrogant employees who treat you like shit, and then to queue for hours on the long line in European airports. Thinking of the moment I got my European passport and I walked through the fast lane of quickly checking your passport on a machine and looking at all those poor people queuing for very long and thinking, fucking hell, if this was possible, why is it not possible for all of them? It's this entire experience that that informs something. To me, it is the problem. To me here or the problematic in this is my deep belief that art culture is not only a cross-border activity, but is way higher, is much higher above nationalism or above physical borders at its core, or at least in its aspiration, in my aspiration for it. I mean, the company I am a partner in, the small production company, is called No Nation Films. And all of this comes together to be a question of how can we be worldly, in the political sense, in the deeper sense, without being disrespectful or without being outside of the current disasters. So to me, for example, when Russia invades, the full-scale invasion or even the small-scale invasion before that of Ukraine, and I think, how can I, if I were Ukrainian or if I'm working in Ukraine, how can I avoid a growing sense of national need or pride or identity? How can I not be that? It's the moment where the violation happens that makes me affirm a national identity. And that happens. I mean, I don't want even to start talking about how since December 8th last year, Israel decided that it's necessary for Israel to take over a good part of Syria's south. And it's like you just walked in and said, like, yeah, this is ours now. We have put our flag on it. And in all of this, you look at that and you feel like, yeah, but the problem is that we are so tired in Syria and we have a very long list of priorities and needs and necessities that it's barely that there is time to think about this violation. You know, like it's overwhelming for those in power, for people in the street, for families, for artists alike. Now, when I look at all of this and I see, to me, the question is the same question of whether art is political or not, is neutral or not. It's the same question, because to me, the political is inherently part of what art is. It's part of what it is at the core, philosophically, practically. But then also art is not political in the sense of being a direct activist tool. Art can have a much higher platform or plateau where it is connecting and it's not stuck within the direct conflict of the moment, but can help navigate the direct moment from a wider framework. And that does not take away that the fact that it's political, that is not about it being neutral, because I truly believe it can never be neutral. I think that's one of the most hypocritical or arrogant ways of trying to control art, is by inviting it to be neutral. So it is not neutral, but it also is not partisan in the direct sense necessarily. It aims to connect us. It aims to be traveling. It aims to be that I read something from South Africa or from Ukraine or so on, and think about my own region in parallel. That was, for example, a way that we worked with censorship in Syria when we established Docsbox, the film festival, in 2018. We knew that if we wanted to do a film festival, an independent one, in a country where festivals are only sponsored, and permitted by, not even by the government, but by the actual intelligence services. So they had to check every little thing in it and see if they want this to happen or not. And part of that was that we knew if we want to do this, we could not be, for example, submitting formerly banned Syrian films that are critical of the government for censorship approval. We knew that the minute we do that, they would just close our festival down. They would just not allow us to do anything. And that was when we developed this simplified idea back then that we called parallel realities. So we would show films from, I don't know, from Poland during the communist rule, or from Myanmar and the resistant movement there to military junta rule, and so on. And we thought, this is how we cross borders. This is how crossing these borders provides solutions, provides hope, because we knew that when you watch a film on how intelligence services in Poland used to spy on people and imprison them without trial, people will not leave our cinema discussing Polish history. People will be leaving our cinema talking about their own life. But then the censor would not feel compelled to ban the film because it's talking about a fallen regime somewhere else. It's fine. Now, this happens, for example, when we decided to, for the first time in the country's history, as far as we know, we put a ballot. So there was an audience award in the festival, and there was a ballot box on the exit from the cinemas. And that ballot box was a very simple thing, a cliche anywhere else in film festivals. But in Syria, it ended up with Reuters writing a headline saying the first free vote in Syria in 40 years. So in a way, you know that a small object that you put in the foyer of a cinema, in the entrance, where people start to fold a paper and put it in the ballot in a country where there's no free election. And when they put it, they're all laughing and making jokes and walking away and looking around to see if somebody heard the joke. Now, to do this, for example, we thought it's very simple. You count the votes. And then we discovered that it's actually very difficult to decide on a system to count votes, especially when you don't have experience with democracy. You don't know what kind of Excel sheet formula counts this in a fair way. So we reached out to colleagues in the Netherlands, in the Festival of Amsterdam, IDFA, that I much later on became the director of which. And we said, how do you do this? And they said, okay, here's our Excel sheet. This is how we do it. And we started asking, why this way, not that way? And they started explaining to us how to balance the number of people who attended the film, because it's not to be counted if less people watch this film or not, how you have to choose equally the voted screenings. And it was quite interesting to have this support from somebody else, somewhere else, where they can immediately chip in and help us figure out how to do this. It doesn't mean we will not change the Excel sheet next year and think about it critically. We will. But at the same time, it was this different borders being crossed all the time, physically, but also internally. The other thing that I think still goes on in the third world, whatever we are called, and it is basically the place of money in the equation of who crosses the border. So it was always easier to get people from France, from Germany, from even the United States, and to have their embassies and their international cultural agencies of their nations finance their flights and their tickets and their fees sometimes. While it was very, very difficult to get money to invite someone to come from Zimbabwe or Brazil or India, because those structures are not aimed, we don't have such structures. And this means that it becomes a bit of like in quantum physics, like things will go everywhere and our choices are going everywhere. But then there are slitted windows, and our choices will go through these windows that are preset. That's the realism of this nationalism in borders and in allowing the crossing of borders. I don't know how to where this could lead, but I hope I hope you agree this is connected to what you're talking about.
Not at all, Orwa. What are you saying? I want Princess to respond because Princess has been staying there with a face that I know has questions and answers and complications. So, Princess.
I was so eager to respond to Orwa, but then somewhere along the line, he took me on a different trajectory. But I think I wanted to comment on the idea of, if I heard you well, Orwa, you were saying that sometimes art does not just serve the function of disruption, which often it's made to, I guess, because of the needs of the context. And we've already seen or heard from Kateryna that in Ukraine, for example, even in this very terrible circumstances where they have war, art spaces still fill up. And I think for me, I thought this is a no-brainer. It's because art becomes a balm. It becomes a space that nourishes the people. It becomes a space for not necessarily healing, because healing is gradual, but some kind of I don't know, reprieve, some kind of community or fellowshipping together in a time of crisis. So this speaks again to how art serves many functions. And I don't think, and all of it is true, because I think that there is a form of secularity in terms of its functions. It's not just one function. And secularity is something that I think powers that be do not like, because they like linear models where you can predict the outcome, right? You have the starting point, goes to second stage, third stage, there's a product, then there's an output, and we show it to the world, which is what interests me in this disruption of the festivals of the oppressed. It's not just a penchant for just disrupting, but to also say that linear models are usually what powers that be resort to, because they can predict what art can do. And they also know the power of art. So they want to make sure that we go with that linear model. So we disrupt, first of all, to make space for ourselves. I think you see what's happening in America right now. They're really trying to make sure that they control art spaces, even universities, spaces where knowledges are created. And so I think then that secularity is what then makes us a disruptive force, because we're trying to run away from the linear model of living and breathing, making and moving, because you are told you need to move from this point to that other point. So I guess I just wanted to nod on the secularity node that exists in the work. And it's important for us to think about art as a space for breathing, healing, disrupting, offending, because we do a lot of that. So it's all of this in one, and all that is true in terms of how art functions in the various spaces that we occupy, particularly in this third world, or whatever they call us, as Orwa said. We're constantly having to react or to use the art through it, because sometimes it's the only space or it's the only medium that we can use to voice out our issues. So inevitably then takes on the function of activism, but it's good to also consider the other functions of art. So thank you, Orwa. I just wanted to make a comment on that.
Katya, do you want to?
I'll just one comment just for accuracy here, and then I shut up for a bit. I truly believe that we don't need to impose disruption as an adjective or as a characteristic of art. Good art is disruptive by nature. And to me, that's what comes from outside art. So from politics, from the political activity comes in, let's use art for disruption. But art will fight back, because art will be also critical and disruptive towards that itself too. It's an inherent part of nature of art, of imagination. So to me, what art adds to the world is not, I mean, the only word that I can say, I can think of is imagination. We are here to free, expand, and bring in more imagination to life, to society, to people. So it is not, in this sense, even the question of healing, is more utilitarian, like in a way, if we open imagination, healing too will become more possible.
Thanks, Orwa. Katya, so I'm interested in your expression.
I was thinking now in this discussion of ours that, we talk about, borders, kind of limits of nationalism and national identities, about the political art and, activism. And I just wanted to, I know it's not a caution, it's just, I think it's important to remember about, multitudes, that the function and, the meaning of, art, and also the connection between artistic practices and identities is very plural. It exists on many levels. The fact that people need to, in a way, rediscover or reconnect to their identities today through the connection to a landscape, to a cultural landscape, to a certain kind of social body, which is a country, for example. It can be limiting, but it can also be empowering if that's not the only boundaries which are there. Because my identity and my connection to this cultural landscape does not mean that I cannot also identify also in motion. Again, I was talking about movement, in motion in time with other realities and with other cultural landscapes. As long as I see and include this movement in myself and don't limit, my identity will be flexible and inclusive, not exclusive. And when that comes into a cultural practice, into artistic practice, then artistic practice also becomes a multitude, because there is a disruption, in artistic practices, but there's also healing. That's true. And that can be absolutely at the same time. It also can depend on, who is the audience, because for one audience, it can be a very healing practice. And for another audience, it can be a very disruptive practice. And yes, I completely agree with Orwa. I also think that, art is political. But again, there are also so much art, especially in the Western world, which is purely decorative. Not because it's being used by politicians, not because it's being ideological. It's just purely decorative because, there is no, art becomes political when there is a challenge. If there is no challenge, or if the challenge is not close to you, then art becomes very, maybe aesthetically beautiful, but in a way toothless. But when the challenge is there, the multiplicity is still inside. Being political does not necessarily mean being activist, I think. But I also believe that there is very kind of openly, articulatedly activist art, and it can also be great. It also depends on the moment and on the message. and on the intention of the artist, and whether this connection between the artist and the audience is there. We had this discussion with colleagues when this Swiss festival Culturescapes. In 2019, we had an edition on Poland, so we were kind of trying to present a Polish cultural landscape, in Switzerland. And we were going to different Polish theater festivals with my colleagues and trying to see, okay, what's happening in Polish theater today, and what can we invite to Switzerland. In 2017, 18, the moment of preparation of the festival, Poland is being ruled by a very conservative party, and the overall political climate is awful. The freedoms are being sort of cut, and the government is putting a very political appointees from the Conservative Party to rule the cultural institutions, and the theater is openly, pronouncedly activist. It just speaks from the stage, it's just shouts in your face. And for some of my Swiss colleagues, that was too much. They said, like, but it's not really a theater. It's a pure activism. What are they doing? Where's the subtlety of theater? Where's the metaphors and everything? But the audiences where it was, full houses, and the audiences were really engaged, because in that point of time, for that audience, very pronouncedly open activist theater was super important, because the life and the political and like a social spectrum around them was crumbling. They have to speak out. But then the question is, okay, is it translatable? Can, for example, that politically active Polish theater, would it be understood in Switzerland or in Germany? Is it really necessary? Does it need a certain framework? And the similar questions we're facing now, because now the Culturescapes Festival is focused on Sahara. So we're talking about in a metaphorically wider sense, what is happening in cultural landscapes in Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Can those experiences be just brought to Switzerland, for example, without translation? Can they be shown to the audiences who don't know much about the context, or not? I mean, it's this eternal questions that I think we as also as kind of cultural makers, as curators, as directors of festivals, keep constantly asking ourselves, okay, what happens with art when it goes to a different audience? Is the language universal or not? I don't think the language is universal. I don't think that the language of art it's never universal. It's rather local. And what happens when this locality transcends the border and lands elsewhere? And I think it's a huge discussion which should be more present between people who help artists and artistic practices and artistic works go from one context to another context. How much do we know about each other? How much context is enough? How much political is too much for another context where people are used to something much more, again, peaceful and maybe toothless and rather beautiful and entertaining? Are we aiming to change that context and say, hey, no, life in Switzerland might be peaceful and happy, but look at the world around you. It's not. It's really on fire in very many senses in different parts of the world. You cannot hide from it. Or is it not a function of art at all? And it should be in media and newspapers, and people choose, okay, do I want to see what's happening in Syria today, or do I not? And do I want to look into what's happening in Palestine or not? Do I want to see what's happening in Ukraine, or like forget about it? It's too much pain and too much trouble. But I think as long as we ask those questions, ask ourselves, and in the conversations like this, we sort of map those questions and don't let them disappear. Then this process of, I don't know, thinking and answering, and then kind of answering differently in a different time, different context, that will go on.
You guys do my job for me. I love you. So I'm gonna I'm gonna throw, as I said in our prep, I'm gonna throw a random question. I'm a choreographer, and language. Thank you, Katja, for bringing it up, because it's just something that I wanted to raise. What language do we all dream in? Hadi, I'm going to start with you. What language do you dream in? What language do you imagine?
Arabic. Yeah.
Orwa. Arabic. Yeah, Princess.
I dream in many languages, depends. If I'm having romantic dreams, then it's in English because I was colonized that way.
Katja.
I'm dreaming and thinking between English and Ukrainian, and it depends on where at the moment the focus is. Then, you know, the more dreams and more will switch between the languages. Sometimes in two languages at the same time. A bit schizophrenic, yeah.
I love how the women were complex and the men were just like Arabic. All right, you're muted. Go.
No, to me, it's very simple, and I think it's comparable to Hadi. I left Syria. I was exiled when I was 35, 36. So my relationship with all other languages is really secondary. I did not leave at an early age. The other languages I have, but they are not part of my, you know, they didn't get to my dreams. I was late.
I was late too, to be honest. Like I learned it, I think 7 years ago. So still I don't have the time to think how dreams looks like in English.
I don't need to explain. All of you have native names, and mine is Princess. So there you go.
We're all princesses, you said, Princess. So.
Your name is a statement, I would say.
Yeah.
It is. Can I just, because really, Kateryna really made me think a lot. And I appreciate what you've been saying, Kateryna. And I agree that pluralism is the core of all of this sector. When I speak against or critically of art and culture taking a nationalist identity angle, I only mean that in the sense of being part of a wave or a movement. So being part of, for example, a propaganda movement, or being part of, because that's the experience in my region, and that's the experience in different parts of the world. Being part of promoting identity or selling audience identity, pride, or identity victimhood, or these are things that I find very problematic, but also interesting, of course, to think about. So the fact that art is always connecting something very local to the whole of humanity is yeah, I 100% with you on this, on this, no doubt. To me, the point of disruption and activism is a little more, I see it in a bit more of a complex way. I think decorative art is deeply political in the sense of art politics, in the sense that it is promoting liberalism. So it is, I don't give a shit, I only focus on what's beautiful and kind and nice, is a political position too. And it is even propagandist in the sense of selling this detachment from the world at times of, especially at times like now, you know, where there's so much pain going around. So to me, the point becomes so much more about these, the fact that activist Polish nationalism in the example you bring up is very important, but then I am always questioning the propaganda part of it. I am always asking myself and going into difficult discussions with people, with good colleagues from around the world, who think, for example, that when neo-Nazis are around, we have to do our own counter-propaganda, for example, you know. And I'm always feeling that I think or believe that propaganda is categorically wrong. You know, so my answer to neo-Nazi propaganda, as an example, or dictatorship, or Putin, or all of those forms, is not to do what they are doing, is to respond with a much more calm and centered artistic imagination, rather than try to win more votes via art. or to counter their statements via art. But this is all in question to me. This is where I've been for a while. Thank you.
I like what you say there, Orwa. Sorry, through you, Chair. But I guess what happens is that you know that struggle porn sells, right? The poverty porn will sell. You have to say that you're struggling very much, and then you get a lot of funding. And so sometimes people, I mean, automatically resort to telling the sad stories, a lot of crying, a lot of struggle narratives on stage. I see it in the theater space, especially applied theater, that it really has to just focus on the struggles and the poverty narratives, and which are mostly propagandist because they feed the fantasies of the oppressor.
I agree with you, Princess. It looks like they are buying a story. They don't buy the action, the art itself. It's like, what story is more interesting? Okay, this is a syllable. So they take it. Yeah. It's interesting that I am in Dubai now. I'm talking about the creative art, and the creative art could be political, actually. Yeah, and here, like, it's very interesting, actually. I don't know if many people know about art here, but art is very interesting as an art practitioner for many years, I mean, and the curator. I feel like everything is well staged, well decorated, but it's absolutely political statement, and it reminds me of what you said, Kateryna. When uh, wealth, there is no distraction. Yeah, they don't want people to go in depth in how to create, how to create the programs for them, and the right expressions of how to present and talk about art, entertain.
And I have a question, I think, for the panel before I know time is ticking. Like, how do we weld in a way that speaks to the needs of the context, which is the local context? So you're welding, but also speaking to the needs of the context, especially because welding can be such an anxious a concept that causes anxiety to particular people, especially here in Africa, because welding comes sometimes or is associated with universalism, and that universalism is connected to how a particular people in the global north would kind of structure how we weld, how we live, how we breathe, how we dance, which music we dance to, and how we move and so forth, and how festivals can play a role in that welding, but also speaking to the needs of the context. I mean, I've always been a fan of the Flatfoot Festival in the ways in which it responds to the context, where it's a festival, there's still this program where artists come in and there's a stage, but it also goes around KZN, especially in schools, working with young people who are in their spaces. So taking the festival to the people, but also bringing people to the festival. So that's like one way of responding to the needs of the context. But I'm just wanting to throw it to all of us to think about how do we weld, given our histories, with ideas of welding. Also, remembering is a part of this conversation. I remember, how do we recollect, reorient, rethink? Because remembering is also bringing ourselves back to ourselves.
Orwa.
It's really a complex question. I just think, again, that it is a trick. We are being tricked into thinking of worlding in this way. And I think that worlding, or even universalism, has never been a question of, again, imposition. Art can and gets to a place where it crosses beyond the local and becomes universal. And that is part of how it has always been. And I think the certain sense of I don't know, originality, honesty. It's very old school terms I'm saying, I know, but at the same time, the point is, to me, in my experience, and I know this much better in film, but I think it applies to many other things. Let me be very audacious about this and say I have never felt or heard a colleague from any poor country in the world complain about the lack of context in an artistic work. I have never heard someone come from a poor country and say no, this film or this theater play or this novel should have explained to me more the context. I don't understand it. This is an entitlement that, in my quite elaborate experience, is exclusive to entitled Western audiences. They are the ones who are always demanding that the film or the work of art is adapted to their habits, to their convenience, and that they really feel entitled to do that. My long-standing example about this was always been, I grew up in Homs, Syria, where we had almost every known Christian confession available. Like I had colleagues in my school who are Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant, and we had Muslims of various sects and confessions too. But I have never known what the actual outfit, the costumes of priests of different Christian churches, how to identify them. I learned this after watching hundreds of films. Because the first time I watched, I didn't know that, of course, this is a Protestant priest. Of course, I didn't know that this is what a Protestant priest would wear. But I was not feeling entitled to blame the film or the filmmakers or the festival or the outlet for not helping me because I am lazy and I need you to tell me. It was more and more work from my side. I finish watching the film, I feel compelled to go get the right book and read, now to research, even to ask AI, if you will. But at the end of the day, I feel I am participating in the process of watching and experiencing the film or the artwork. The entitlement is, to me, a very colonial practice of demanding context. Now, when we start from your artwork about South Africa or Zimbabwe or Jordan or Syria or Ukraine needs to be understood by me, we start by saying context, but we end up making or being cornered to make works and to screen or exhibit works that are neutralized in their form, in their tone, in their style, that are formatted or belong to a monoform. Whereas that's not needed if a French person is watching a German film. There's no need for extra context there. That entitlement does not apply. So I must say, I find it to be a major fake question. This is a construct. When you make a brilliant piece of work on Zimbabwe and we show it, the maximum context it can need to become worldly would be, I don't know, an side DVD bonus extra or a talk after or a little brochure on the side speaking about what's in it. But that's the maximum, because when I grew up watching films and attending theater and reading theater from all around the world, I never felt the entitlement to say, why the fuck is Henrik Ibsen not explaining to me why these people are alone in this region of the country? I shut up and took it, and that became my image of Scandinavia for a while, because he introduced me to this different atmosphere, and my senses were open to see how these people live rather than to be convinced. That's another term that we've always faced with in the West, where people always use the word, I'm not convinced with your idea. I'm convinced with your idea. And I find being convinced to be really another construct, another fake question. I don't need to convince you. You just have to give me this time and attend and open your heart. So this humility of reception is the interactive part of making something worldly. It's to be original and authentic and open your imagination, and then to invite people to be a little more humbled in reception.
Okay, so we're right at the end. Katya, I'm going to give you a moment because I know you want to respond. To our audience, I'm sorry, I'm going to take the choreographic decision not to allow you to ask questions, not to engage this very meaningful panel, because as you can see, these people are wonderful. So Katya, can you respond? And then I'm going to give everybody a moment to, I will pop another cool question out and you will respond. But Katya, go.
I just very shortly wanted to, hold on to the word humbleness, because I think it's crucial in this discussion. And I see that this discussion, the last part, what you were saying, Orwa, really brought a lot of reactions in the comments and, applause and everything. So it really is something, a burning issue. But I think it's important to hold on to, to humbleness, to understanding and being aware of the kind of natural limitedness of our experiences, and staying open to see and learn more and ask questions. And as long as we are sort of humble and open and aware of our positionality, where we stand, from which position, from which experience, from which point we are looking at, other people, at other artistic practices, at other experiences, as long as it's there, I think the translation or understanding between different practices will also be present, because then the conversation can happen. And maybe that's also something which, especially for us who work with, Western audiences, because, they are arrogant, that's true. I mean, en masse, I'm sorry to be maybe so blunt, but maybe also in a way growing this humbleness, or kind of, helping people to realize that they don't know everything, and not everything has to be, chewed and put in their mouth with a lot of explanation. And there are a lot of work to be done in learning about something which used to be out of their immediate kind of scope of knowledge and interest. And that the power doesn't mean being negligent to other contexts. That power actually means being responsible, for your own humbleness, again, for learning, for opening your eyes and opening your hearts and getting more. Maybe that can be a part of our, I don't know, mission, maybe.
So we're right at the end, guys, and I could do this conversation for hours. Thank you so much. I just want to say that as my last parting is I'm so very grateful that you all agreed. I know that you are all extremely busy. You are all working in contexts that are, is all I can say. The South Africans will understand what I mean when I go, I want to go back to a question or a provocation that really made me very emotional when Jay Pather opened our talks this day, a couple of days ago. And he said, we all know this. If everybody who's sitting in this panel knows this, there's so much work to be done, but who does the work? And I just want like one sentence from you. Whose responsibility is it to do the work of everything we just discussed?
You threw a big question for 2 minutes we have left. On my side, very shortly, I think it's our work. I mean, I know it's my work, and I'm trying to do this work as good as I can, and then through that work, try slowly, maybe millimeter, change the environments that I'm connected to, environments that.
Yeah, I think everyone would be the answer. It's a collaborative circle.
Ditto, I fully agree. And I just think that we should all have the right to get tired also. It's all of us, and that means that it's also a relay race, like we have to be able to collapse and somebody else picks the baton and runs, and that is all of us together globally.
Yeah, agree with everyone. To be honest, I'm learning more and more about the responsibility, and I know like there is things that you like it to happen, you manifest it, be responsible.
I love you all very much. I just want to say this. I'm sorry to everybody that we didn't give an opportunity to ask questions. There are amazing comments and questions in the chat. And hopefully if AI and the technologies allow, we will be able to share this with everybody. This is the last discussion of the Jomba MASIHAMBISANE Dialogues, edition number 5. I'm very grateful to everybody who's made this happen. I'm very grateful to this amazing panel. People I get to call my friends. I am so lucky. And we are going to have a closing kind of moment. Wesley, who's our tech guru, has asked us to just take 5 minutes before. So, Hadi, Habibi, Orwa, Katya, I'm looking forward to hugging you very soon. Dr. Princess, I love you all so much. And thank you, 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 thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great honor to be with you.
I want to say one thing. So this is a soft landing to a series of conversations that Culturescapes. I'm currently sitting in Switzerland, not because I want to be here, but because, as everybody has said on this panel, we have to do the work that we do. So Culturescapes is doing a second edition of the Sahara because it is such a big region and Africa requires the space. Katya and Yurian, who's in the audience, have suggested that we do a series of discussions around decolonizing festivals, which I think is a really, really, really important conversation to be had. I'm very grateful for this panel because these people are people who are thinking and doing in the most magical ways in places that can and cannot move. So this is a soft landing. On the 30th of August at Jomba Contemporary Dance Experience, we will host a day of discussions and they will kind of catalyze into various discussions in various places that will then kind of come to a culmination at the opening of Culturescapes on the 9th of October. So yeah, if you are interested, please send me an email. My email address is on all of the publications and all that kind of stuff. I want to say a big thank you to Wesley Maheri, who's our technical guru, who's been assisted by Bash. I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Leanne Lutz, who's trusted me and made me a partner in doing Jomba with her. I want to say a massive thank you to the steering committee who guides us through creating such magical things. And I want to say thank you to the wonderful audience that we have. We're going to take 5 minutes, and then if you are interested in coming to see our closing and the remarks that the steering committee has on this conversation and this dialogue, yeah.